For as adaptable as it's been since Russia launched its invasion, Ukraine has also shown that when it strikes upon a winning strategy, it tends to stick with it. And right now, that strategy is taking out Russian oil. Untold tons of Russia's most valuable product have already burnt up thanks to Ukraine's attacks on refineries, depots, pumping stations, and any other target that might have even the smallest whiff of Russia's oil about it. And Ukraine just did it again. It's once, twice, 3 times an oil platform attack, as Ukraine just struck Russia where it hurts most, and where it least expected, its Caspian Sea oil rigs. On January 11th, United 24 media reported that Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, or SOF, had carried out a precision drone strike that hit not 1 but 3 of Russia's offshore oil drilling platforms in the Caspian Sea. All 3 of those platforms, which Putin would have thought was safe from Ukraine's attacks when he launched his invasion, suffered direct hits, though as United 24 media reports, it's unclear just how much damage was done. The outlet notes that NASA's FIRMS monitoring system, which is used to track fires on Earth using satellite imagery, has yet to detect fires at any of the 3 facilities that Ukraine struck, but that doesn't mean that no damage was done. Instead, it suggests that Ukraine hit structural components of the 3 platforms rather than any aspect of the stations that might have contained stores of oil or gas. Those 3 platforms are named the Filanovsky, Valery Greifer, and Yuri Kochagin platforms. Confirmation of all 3 being hit comes from the Ukrainian military's general staff. Taking to Telegram, the general staff said, "As part of measures to reduce the military and economic potential of the aggressor, units of the Defense Forces of Ukraine struck 3 drilling platforms of Lukoil Corporation in the waters of the Caspian Sea, namely the V. Filanovsky, Yuri Kochagin, and Valery Greifer platforms. These facilities are used to support the Russian occupation army." The General Staff makes no mention of the SOF. That comes from United 24 media, which says that confirmation of the group's involvement came from a statement that the SOF released on January 11th. Regardless, it's clear that one of Ukraine's special operations branches would have to be involved in an attack like this because Russia's Caspian Sea oil platforms aren't easy targets to strike. As Euromaidan Press says in its report on the incident, these platforms are at least 950 kilometers, or around 590 miles plus from the Ukraine war's front lines. Any drones that Ukraine sends to them would have to offer the sheer range required for such a strike, with Ukraine perhaps also needing to clear aerial pathways through portions of its own occupied territory to even make these strikes possible in the first place. But Ukraine did it, and it has done it before. United 24 media claims that this strike, which targeted infrastructure operated by Russia's Lukoil energy giant, is the second confirmed drone attack on Russia's infrastructure in the Caspian Sea region. The first came just a couple of weeks before, as United 24 media also reported on December 31, 2025. In that strike, Ukraine's Security Service, or SBU, reported the scoring of several direct hits on another Russian oil platform, seemingly with aerial drones. Video and photographs captured from the scene appear to confirm this, and the special Kherson Cat X account says that this strike appears to have targeted the Valery Greifer platform too. Though the January 11th strike may only be the second officially confirmed attack on Russia's Caspian Sea infrastructure, there have likely been several others. Euromaidan Press claims that this latest strike represents the 5th that Ukraine has carried out in about a month, adding that Ukraine began what appears to have evolved into a full-blown Caspian-focused campaign back on December 11th. The campaign began on 11th of December when Ukrainian drones reportedly hit the Filanovsky platform, halting extraction from more than 20 wells. Follow-up strikes targeted the same platform again, as well as the Yuri Kochagin platform, and later the Valery Greifer platform, also known as the Rakoshichna field, the outlet says. It appears that Ukraine has its eyes set on a trio of prizes. All 3 of these platforms have been struck repeatedly, meaning Ukraine is making something very clear to Putin. These oil-drilling behemoths that he thought were safe in the Caspian Sea are anything but. Ukraine is hitting them again and again, suggesting that Russia has no answers for stopping drones that seem to have consistent and clear pathways toward oil platforms that play important roles in keeping Putin's Ukraine war coffers filled. We'll come back to why these platforms in particular are so important in a moment. Another important thing to note is that Ukraine's Caspian Sea strike wasn't a standalone attack. In fact, it was part of a night where Ukraine had a wide range of targets, emphasizing once again the country's reliance on and the capability of its deep strike drones have grown in 2026. The General Staff's Telegram post highlighted this along with reporting on the Caspian Sea strikes, stating, "In addition, the Defense Forces carried out a fire strike against a launcher of a Buk M3 anti-aircraft missile system launcher in the area of the village of Baranacheva, temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk Oblast. This medium-range air defense system is designed to engage aerodynamic targets. According to preliminary data, hits and explosions were recorded. This is an interesting tidbit of information. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine's spate of attacks on Russia's Caspian Sea oil infrastructure may have been made possible by the establishment of safe aerial pathways through portions of occupied Ukraine. If Ukraine is indeed using long-range drones, they also need to pass through a portion of Russian territory to get into the Caspian Sea, as Ukraine isn't going to risk sparking an international incident by sending its drones through Georgian and Azerbaijani airspace, which it would have to do to bypass Russian territory and still hit the Caspian. The point we're making here is that there should be plenty of opportunities for Russia's air defenses to do something about Ukraine's drones before they strike oil platforms. So why aren't they? Strikes like the one that Ukraine has confirmed against Russia's Buk M3 on January 11th may offer the answer. Russia's air defenses have been devastated throughout the war. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost 1,270 of its anti-aircraft warfare units, with the Buk M3 that was destroyed around the same time as Ukraine's latest Caspian Sea attack adding to that number. This sheer scale of loss has created a situation in which there are untold numbers of gaps in Russia's air defense coverage. The New Voice of Ukraine covered this problem back in November 2025, in an article in which it claimed that the majority of Russia's air defenses are focused on Moscow or the front lines of the war, leaving very little behind to protect the rest of the country's massive amounts of territory. The outlet quoted the head of Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation, Andriy Kovalenko, who said, "For context, most Russians in the country are not protected by Putin at all, even though he constantly promised security to everyone." Kovalenko adds that Russia is dealing with shortages in several of its main air defense systems, such as its S-300s, S-400s, and Pantsir systems. What this means is that Ukraine is able to exploit Russia's lack of air defenses to send drones into Russian territory with ease, as long as those drones can negotiate the front lines and occupied regions of Ukraine where Russia has amassed the majority of its air defense presence. Could that have been what happened on January 11th? It may be no coincidence that Ukraine took out a Buk M3 at around the same time as it attacked Russia's trio of Caspian Sea oil platforms, though this is speculation. There may possibly have been no need to hit Russia's air defenses any harder than they had already been either. In the December 31st attack on a Caspian Sea platform that we mentioned earlier in the video, Ukraine hit the platform with what appeared to be similar kinds of drones that it used on the front lines. In other words, Ukraine probably got those drones in close via some sort of vessel before unleashing its attack. The same may have happened on January 11th. The SOF has shared a video on X that offers some brief insight into how it carried out its attack. Lasting for about 50 seconds, the video shows the view from several drones as they zero in on their oil platform targets. It's unclear if these are drones deployed from vessels or long-range drones that have traveled through Ukrainian and Russian territory to get to where they needed to go. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. The drones hit their targets. Once again, Russia's Caspian Sea oil platforms have been proven to be extremely vulnerable. Adding to all of this is that Ukraine also completed a separate and seemingly unrelated strike against Russia's forces in the Kherson region of Ukraine at around the same time as the SOF was hitting Russia's Caspian Sea oil platforms. United 24 media says that Ukraine hit a logistics depot used by Russia's 49th Combined Arms Army close to the settlement of Novotroitska. As is so often the case with Ukraine's strikes, the country hit a facility that was created to supply Russia's frontline troops with the equipment they need to sustain their assaults on Ukraine's positions. So it's not just Russian oil that Ukraine is chipping away. Piece by piece, Ukraine is destroying Russia's ability to keep its equipment moving through the occupied territories. But let's come back to the 3 oil platforms that the SOF just struck. There are several good reasons why these platforms are being targeted in particular, as well as why Ukraine has turned its attention to Russia's position in the Caspian Sea as of late 2025. We'll start with the oil platforms. All 3 have the potential to generate a lot of money for Putin's war chest if they're allowed to continue their operations unabated. The Filanovsky oil field, on which the platform of the same name stands, is extremely important to Russia. United 24 media says that this oil field is one of the largest to which Russia has access in the Caspian Sea. It has estimated oil reserves of about 129 million tons, and may also be home to around 30 billion cubic meters of gas. A single ton of oil amounts to about 6.5 barrels. Multiply 129 million tons by 6.5 and you get a potential 838.5 million barrels in this Caspian Sea oil field alone. Of course, Russia doesn't have access to all of these estimated reserves, not by a long shot. Still, it's worth considering. In December, the Moscow Times reported that Russia was selling barrels of oil at a steep discount, which had resulted in it charging just $34.52 per barrel to the countries that continue to buy, while Russia struggles under sanctions. If we take that figure, as low as it is, and multiply it by 838.5 million barrels, we get over $28.9 billion. That isn't an inconsequential chunk of change. Even if Russia can only extract a fraction of the estimated oil reserves available to its crews in the Filanovsky oil field, that still amounts to a whole lot of oil revenue that Putin can tax for his war. As for the Filanovsky oil field's gas reserves, it's a little harder to get specific figures. Back in April 2024, the Kyiv Independent reported that Bloomberg had claimed that Russia was selling gas to China for $257 per 1,000 cubic meters. If we take that figure as given, and it may have dropped in the nearly 2 years since due to Western sanctions, that would mean that the value of the gas at Filanovsky is somewhere in the region of $7.7 billion. Not as high value as the oil, but still plenty of potential for Putin to exploit this one location for money. And that's the interesting point. Filanovsky is just one of the 3 locations that Ukraine struck, and the other 2 also offer Russia plenty of cash-generating potential. United 24 media adds that the Yuri Kochagin field has an estimated 77.8 million tons of oil, along with 1.2 billion cubic meters of gas. That's over $17.5 billion in oil and a little over $308 million of gas, using the figures that we shared earlier. As for the Grafer oil field, Euromaidan Press says that the region has recoverable reserves of about 21.16 million tons of oil and 33 billion cubic meters of gas. Add another 4.3 billion tons in oil and about $8.4 billion in gas to the pile. Suddenly, Ukraine targeting Russia's Caspian Sea oil platforms makes a lot of sense. It can't do a lot about Russia owning this oil and gas, and it's not like Ukraine can send drones deep underground to take out the oil and gas to stop Russia from extracting it. What Ukraine can do is cause constant disruption at the oil facilities that Russia has built to exploit these massive multi-billion-dollar Caspian reserves. Whenever those facilities are delayed in their operations or taken offline completely, Russia has to wait a little longer to get its hands on oil and gas that it can sell. And in a war that has become one of attrition, related as much to finances as to soldiers and the equipment on the battlefield, every strike that takes money out of Putin's hands is a strike that is worth conducting for Ukraine. In the wider context, Ukraine's Caspian Sea strikes serve another purpose. They show Russia that it can't have everything its own way in that particular sea. There's no denying that Russia has done well to establish itself in the Caspian Sea. Back in 2024, the Jamestown Foundation highlighted how important the oil and gas fields that Russia now controls are, especially in the context of European energy security. The outlet notes that though Russia traditionally considers the energy resources it extracts from the Caspian Sea as inferior to those pulled from its Arctic and Siberian deposits, it still understands how important its position in the Caspian Sea can be. As the foundation says, leading Russian policymakers are visibly concerned about the prospect of countries in the Caspian region becoming an important energy source for the European Union, potentially strengthening their political-military cooperation with Moscow's adversaries. In other words, control over Caspian oil and gas brings with it the potential ability to keep many European countries dependent on Russia for those products. And with that dependency comes money that Putin can use to wage his war. That's why Russia is trying to isolate the Caspian Sea region from Europe, and is hoping to convince the so-called Caspian 5 to help it to do so. Those 5 countries include Iran, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, along with Russia. All have oil and gas interests in the Caspian Sea, and all have signed the Convention on the Legal Status of the Caspian Sea, which was an agreement formed in 2018 to end disputes between the Caspian 5. Of course, a lot has changed since 2018. However, Russia is seeking to leverage the cooperative nature of this agreement against Europe for the reasons we've just outlined. In November 2024, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists suggested that Putin's Caspian Sea wrangling was paying dividends. The consortium argues that Russia has managed to wrest control of large portions of Kazakhstan's crude away from the country, which in turn means that Western oil companies can't cooperate with Kazakhstan to extract that crude. With control over Caspian oil and gas comes control over Europe's energy needs, at least according to Putin's logic. Even those Western companies still operating in the region are now having to play ball with Russia to get what they want from it. But that could soon start to change, thanks to Ukraine and at least one member of the Caspian 5 that isn't particularly happy with Russia. For Ukraine, strikes against Russia's oil interests in the Caspian Sea could thus bring the country closer to European partners that have supported it since the beginning of Putin's invasion. It's a case of one hand washes the other, as Ukraine benefits from more weapons and support, while European countries inch closer to potentially building footholds in the Caspian Sea as Russia's grip weakens. and that grip is certainly starting to loosen. Even before Ukraine started its Caspian campaign, the Maritime Executive was claiming that Russia was starting to see its influence wane in the Caspian region. According to the outlet, Russia also uses the Caspian Sea to transport weapons as well as to extract oil and gas. Shipments of Iranian missiles, drones, and ammunition have all entered Russia via the Caspian Sea, with one notable consignment being one of 220 Fata 360 ballistic missiles, the outlet reports. Ukraine's attacks in the Caspian Sea could be seen as a warning to Russia in this context. Right now, Ukraine is hitting oil platforms. However, it's shown itself more than capable of hitting both Russian warships and Shadow Fleet vessels in the past. Putin may be now wondering how safe his ships are in the Caspian Sea, given that Ukraine is clearly operating within it and seems focused on doing as much damage to Russia's interests there as possible. Russia's relationship with Kazakhstan also seems to be weakening, as seen during the June 2024 edition of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. There, Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev stood on stage with Putin. But as Putin expected his peer to toe the Russian line, Tokayev had different ideas. He refused to acknowledge Russia's annexation of Donetsk and Luhansk. Tokayev also said that he has refused a Russian request to provide Kazakh soldiers to fight in Ukraine, and that he would respect Western sanctions against Russian oil. Such a move would be brave for the leader of a relatively small country at the best of times. To say these things on stage with Putin takes a certain pair of brass somethings that we don't want to mention here. The point in all of this is that Ukraine may be playing a long game with its Caspian Sea strikes. In the immediate sense, it's trying to shut down oil platforms to stop the flow of cash into the Kremlin coffers. But beyond that, Ukraine is whittling away at Russia's Caspian influence at a time when the West's influence in that region seems to be creeping in. Kazakhstan certainly isn't letting itself become beholden to Putin's whims. Perhaps more strikes like those conducted by Ukraine on January 11th will show other members of the Caspian Five that Russia may not be the powerhouse that Putin portrays it to be. And if that happens, Putin's nightmare situation of the West extending its collective tendrils into the Caspian Sea could become a reality. One member of the Caspian Five that Putin would have felt comfortable about staying on Russia's side would have been Iran. But right now, the country's regime has some major problems of its own. A revolution seems to be underway, and it's one that may send Iran's leaders running as fast as they can to Moscow. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for coverage of Ukraine's latest strikes against Russia's oil interests. And thank you, as always, for watching.